All right. So, welcome to this workshop, which is all about kicking fear out of the driver's seat. And as equestrians, we all struggle with fear. Even the top riders struggle with fear. I struggle with fear on occasion. 2 years ago, I had a big concussion. I really lost my confidence after that, and it really took quite a while to properly get back into the saddle and really kind of, even though I didn't think I was scared, there were just all these niggly little bits in the background. So fear can show up in many different ways. It can show up as completely freezing up and not being able to do anything. Maybe you start having panic attacks, or maybe you just blank out as you ride down the center line. And there's so many different ways that, or many reasons that you can lose that fear. Not lose that fear. Lose your confidence and feel fear in the saddle or when you're leading your horse. So if you want to share, please feel free to pop it into the message box. But I would love to know, when you think of fear, when you think of the fear you experience, what kind of fear is that fear? So where does fear show up for you in your riding or in your horse journey? And the reason I'm asking that question is because if you know where your fear comes from, it starts to become a little bit more tangible. And sometimes it's just like, I'm scared. But if it's feeling fear it's quite broad. So once you know a little bit more about where your fear is coming from, or how you experience that fear and what kind of fear you're experiencing, you can start to make sense of how it works for you. And because when we're thinking of fear and how it works, like if we're kind of thinking of the basics of it, fear is just there to keep you safe. It doesn't do anything else, but it's just your brain keeping you safe. It's not there to be that pesky little person, that really annoying friend that's just scared of everything. That's not what it's intending to do. But it's just trying to keep you safe. And quite often when we want to move from feeling that fear to moving to feeling more confident, you have to sometimes you almost have to kind of hit rock bottom in order to move forward. Because what happens is that when you experience fear and you do some work on your fear and to becoming confident, and all of a sudden you start to feel a little bit confident, doesn't mean that you've kind of finished the work you needed to do in order to actually get that confidence back. This is often an ongoing thing that you have to work on. Whereas if you're kind of staying in, I'm doing a little bit, and yeah, I'm happy now, I've overcome my fear, and then all of a sudden the confidence is like skyrocketing, and you do something and it actually sets you back. So you start yo-yoing in that confidence and that fear cycle. And when you're doing that yo-yoing, it sometimes actually makes it worse, but also it might be that you kind of go, oh, I'm not just kind of going to push through enough. And especially when you're experiencing fear in the saddle, when you're riding or when you're doing a competition or when you're handling your horse, doesn't matter where it happens. When you're experiencing fear, your brain, when you're experiencing fear, you feel uncomfortable. And so you don't want, your brain does not want to feel uncomfortable. Yet, not if you are at that point now where maybe you're not writing, or you're avoiding the things that you actually really would like to do. Maybe you want to go out, you're scared of hacking out, you really want to do it, but you're just avoiding doing it because it doesn't feel safe. So you're sticking to the arena. And you might feel guilty, or maybe you're just not even riding at all. You're avoiding getting on your horse. And in this case, the thing that you want to do, get on your horse and ride, or get on your horse and go for a trail ride, or get on your horse and do a competition, feels more uncomfortable than feeling any kind of, maybe you feel a little bit of shame or guilt when you don't do it. So it's kind of, your brain is starting to pick which one of the uncomfortable feelings is the least the least uncomfortable. And that might mean that you start putting off getting on, or doing the things that you want to do. So when you're thinking of your brain, and I already mentioned it, your brain is just there to keep you safe. Your brain is actually not really developed to kind of experience amazing feelings all the time. Your brain is actually just there to keep you safe and, you know, make sure you survive. Make sure that you're hungry, so you eat, you need to go to the toilet, and your fear is just there to keep you safe. And what I want you to do is I want you to think a little bit about your brain being in a box. Your brain is literally, your brain has physically never actually seen the external world. This is a little bit of conceptual thinking here. But your brain itself is just a blob in a dark box. So in your brain, when we're thinking of your perception of reality, your brain, when a stimulus comes in, it starts to make a guess. So let's say your horse tenses up and it looks at something. Your brain makes a guess at what's happening. Or if you hear a loud noise, you hear a big bang, your brain hears the big bang, but it doesn't know what it is, so it starts to make a guess. So it could be, if it's a big bang, it could be fireworks, or it could be a horse kicking the wall, or maybe it's a car that's crashing, or maybe the neighbor is shooting rabbits, whatever it is. So your brain has to take a guess at what that particular thing is, and it makes that guess based on your past experiences. So the things that you've experienced in the past, that's how your brain makes a guess. So, and when we're looking at fear, basically what this comes down to is that if, for example, you've had, so when I had my concussion, I got run over by a horse. I don't actually remember this, but I obviously remember the pain, and the concussion part, where I was kind of out of it for quite a few months. Like probably actually close to a year. I wasn't quite myself, but I was very mindful about the consequences of hitting my head. My brain was very mindful of the consequences of potentially hitting my head again and going through the same thing again. So when I was getting on my horse, one of my horses, I've got two horses. So when I was riding one of my horses, I would automatically, like the moment there was a little bit of tension, or there was a sound, or they maybe did a step sideways, what happened? My brain would calculate and go, ooh, this is not something that you want. This is something that might not be safe. What if you fall off and you hit your head again? And these weren't conscious thoughts. These were unconscious thoughts. It was just my brain calibrating. So if you've experienced a big fall at a jump, maybe you're jumping, your horse stopped and you tumbled over, and again, like maybe you hurt yourself. The next time you're getting into that position of you're about to jump a jump, your brain might straight away go, "Ooh, this might not be a safe situation," and say, "Hey, watch out." The alarm bells start kicking in, and it starts to go, "What do you need to do to stay safe?" So whenever you're experiencing fear, what I want you to keep in mind is that that fear is based on your past experiences. And I don't know if you've seen this video. There's a really cool video out there, and it shows kids petting snakes. So they put kids and snakes in the same room, and these snakes have been trained like that. They're not venomous, they're not dangerous snakes, but these snakes have been trained the kids who are hanging out with the snakes, and the parents are watching on the camera behind the wall, and the kids were just happily petting the snakes. They were like, "Oh, what's that?" And just touching it and petting it. And the parents were like, "Oh my God, this is so scary. Like, I'm so scared. This is so scary." But what that showcases is that fear is something that you've learned, and it comes from either something you've been taught. So it could be if you've got a parent who's relatively scared of things, or they were worried about you riding, maybe that voice kind of started to kind of come up a little bit, and is in the back of your head, in the back of your mind, like, watch out, watch out, watch out. Or potentially a friend who is quite nervous. Maybe you're riding together with someone who is generally quite nervous, and you're kind of starting to pick up on their nervousness. Or maybe you've had some bad experiences. Maybe you know, like a lot of people, like even when you're younger. So it might be that you're scared now that you weren't aware of, and it could be from something that happened when you were a teenager or a kid. Maybe you got kicked or you got bitten, and all of a sudden there's like maybe that little bit of hesitation. And basically what's happening is that your fear is a thought that you've produced from your perceived reality. So what I mean by that is that when we're thinking about what our reality is, or what your reality is it's not often tangible. So, or it's not objective. Our reality as humans, your brain, means that your reality is not actually objective. And because there's that absence of objectivity, sometimes it creates a bit of dissonance. So, and that means that your brain is just not quite coping with the objective reality and your perceived reality, and it doesn't always quite know how to make sense of those things. And that has a big impact on your experience of fear. Now, that doesn't mean your fear isn't real, because your fear is your reality. But I do want you to keep in mind that what you experience as fear is your perceived reality. And that doesn't make it any less real, but it doesn't mean that it's sometimes really difficult when you're talking to someone else and you're saying, "I'm scared of this particular thing," that they might not understand, because their perceived reality is different from yours. And this is where sometimes when you're working with someone, or when you're working, it could be working with a coach, it could be a friend of yours that you're riding with, and people say, oh, just do it. Just do it. And they are, because for them, it seems like you are maybe overreacting, or it's something that to them doesn't feel like a big deal. But for you, it might be. And this is sometimes where, when you're dealing with your own, with trying to overcome your fear and your reality around that, what can happen is that it can feel really deflating, because people aren't understanding why you aren't able to do it, but also you might start to compare yourself to the people that are able to do it. And it might even be that you've had a fall and you've really, like right now, your heart is bouncing out of your chest just thinking of getting on your horse. And parent next door had a fall, which was even worse. Maybe they broke their leg, whereas you actually came on unscathed. They might have broken their legs, maybe they got a concussion, and they seem fine. They seem to be able to get back on very quickly. And it could just be that their perception of the accident that they had is different from yours. So that's what I want you to keep in mind, because it's so easy, especially when you're experiencing fear, to get stuck in that feeling of comparing yourself. And I think I actually made a post the other day, and one of the things that what I said was, the fear is not your biggest enemy. It's often the shame or the guilt that you feel around feeling fear. And this is why overcoming fear is so incredibly hard, because it's not just that just do it. I mean, in some cases it is. Sometimes you just need to go and do it, and you just need to push through, and you've got the win. You're like, oh my God, amazing, I've got this. But there's going to be moments where pushing through feels impossible. And when you push through and you set a goal that was too big, and you set that goal that was too big, and you just can't quite get there. And then because you can't get there, you start to feel ashamed because you should have been able to do it. And maybe you even feel you're feeling ashamed because you should have been able to do it, and you feel guilty because you didn't quite be able to create the difference that you wanted to make in that experience of fear. So what I want you to think of for a moment is, when you think of this concept that I just talked about, the brain in the box, your perceived reality, and those feelings of comparison, and potentially feeling some shame and guilt around your fear. How does that impact your perception of your fear? Because I was just talking quite a lot, but I would love for you to have a little think about, how do those things, if you're looking at your perception of fear, how does that knowledge impact your perception of fear? And you can let me know in the comment box and messages if you want. I just want you to sit with that for a moment and just have a little think about that. And again, there's no right or wrong answer with these things. Now, moving on from that, we want to go a little bit more into the because that was quite a lot of information. But I want to go a little bit more into the workshop side of this. And so the first thing that we want to do is kind of have a look at how you can recognize fear patterns and how you can stop that fear, that poison in your head from spiraling. And in order to do that, you first need to understand how you perceive fear. How does it show up? How do you perceive it? What happens? Where do you feel it? Is it your mind? Is it in your body? Is it in your heart? Are you starting to sweat? Do you get clammy hands? Are you getting tense in your whole body? Whatever it is, you want to first understand how that fear shows up for you. And the second thing is that I want you to understand, and this is one of the key things that I often work with my clients. I actually work with this this is with the horses and my human clients. I work with both. And one of the key things to understand is understanding the difference between your comfort zone, your stretch zone, and your panic zone. So for a lot of people, when we're talking about fear, a lot of people might experience some nerves. Like there's a difference between having some nerves and full-blown fear. And this is that difference between your stretch zone and your panic zone. So your comfort zone is that place where you feel pretty confident. You're confident, you feel comfortable, you're able to breathe, your body feels relaxed. You've got this. That's your comfort zone. Your stretch zone is the space where, well, literally you're stretching yourself. It's the place where it's not really super comfortable, but it's a little bit uncomfortable, but it's not so uncomfortable that you can't cope. And then you've got your panic zone. This is the space where really you can't cope. You're panicking. Now, the thing what I often see when I work with my clients, I see this with horses as well, but when I work with really nervous clients, so people who are really struggling with fear, what I see quite a lot is that these people are already continuously in the upper end of their stretch zone. They don't know what their comfort zone is. They're pretty much continuously in the stretch zone. And because they're continuously in the stretch zone, they almost don't recognize when they go into the panic zone. So if you're thinking of your comfort zone, stretch zone, panic zone, your comfort zone, let's say it's this big, and then you've got your stretch zone, and then you've got your panic zone. So if you're nervous, if you're really struggling with fear, it might well be that you've got quite a big panic zone. Your panic zone kind of gets triggered very, very quickly. That also then means that your stretch zone is relatively small and your comfort zone is relatively small. And when you're in that state of continuously feeling tense and feeling stretched continuously, it's very easy to start pushing through too quickly. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with necessarily pushing through, but pushing through works really well if your comfort zone is actually pretty big and you've already got a pretty big stretch zone and your panic zone is generally pretty small. If your panic zone is generally pretty small, you can enter that panic zone and come out of it and have made your stretch zone bigger. However, if your panic zone is really big, and you've got a small comfort zone and a small stretch zone, if you spend too much time in that panic zone, it's hard to come out of it. And if you don't have a big comfort zone, it's hard to allow your nervous system a break to process what's happened. I'm going to give you an example for this. I was working, I think this was last year. I was working with one of my clients who had been with her horse. She'd been jumping, and she used to fall off quite a lot. He would have a dirty stop, she would fall off, and it really knocked her confidence quite a lot. But she was one of those people that would just push through, push through, push through, push through. And she came and rode actually one of my horses to practice on. She rode my horse Clover. And I just put a jump out, and I said to her, can you jump that jump? And she jumped the jump. And I asked her, how did that go? And she went, actually, I don't remember. What had happened is that she jumped the jump, but she completely dissociated. She did not remember what she'd done. Her brain had gone into panic zone, and even though she pushed through, it had gone into panic zone, and she wasn't able to remember. And I actually said to her, like, come back in. And she initially said, no, I'm okay, I can go again. I was like, no, just come here. I just want you to come here for a moment. Tell me how that went. I was like, I don't remember. I was like, okay, how does your body feel right now? And that's when she started to recognize that she was actually experiencing quite a lot of tension. She'd gone straight into that panic zone, but she hadn't recognized it because she was so used to pushing through. And this goes back to at the start what I was saying, where your brain makes a guess and it predicts based on past experiences. If you've been taught to push through, it can be very hard to recognize. It can be very hard to recognize your fear patterns. You can't recognize your fear patterns if you're consistently in a state of fear. If you're consistently in that stretch and panic zone, you can't recognize, it's very difficult to recognize your fear patterns because you're continuously in them. And this is where sometimes it's worth even looking wider than just your horse life, because it might well be that these fear patterns actually show up in different parts of your life. Sometimes it's good, but actually, am I able to feel relaxed and be in that comfort zone outside of my horse life? Or am I carrying a lot of stress from work? Maybe work is very stressful at the moment. Maybe kids' life is very stressful, home life, whatever is going on. Those things might actually kick in as well. Because if you aren't feeling comfortable ever, it's very difficult to find that comfort zone when you're trying to overcome that fear working with your horse. So once you're able to understand that stretch and that panic zone, basically what we want to do is I want you to try, and you can try this at home first, and then you can do that with your horse. I want you to feel, and you can do this, it's almost like I do this as a bit of a grounding exercise. And I do a lot of grounding exercises for myself. I do a lot of yoga and meditation because I notice how much it helps me when I'm coaching people, but also when I'm working with horses, because again, you need to be able to pick up on people's energy and body language. The reason I'm good at working with horses who experience fear and working with people who experience fear is because I can feel when I can often go, my shoulders are tensing up. Is this me? Or am I picking something up from the person that I'm working with? So it's often very subtle cues. And once you've trained yourself to do that, it's pretty easy to notice when you're starting to go up. But if you haven't, it can be quite tricky to pick up on those things. So one of the things that is quite vital when you're starting to work on that overcoming of fear is having some really good grounding techniques. And that might just be Yeah, put your hand on your chest and one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly or one hand on your heart. And just taking a couple of really deep breaths in. And just feeling your body. Are you feeling any tension in you? Are you feeling any stress? Are you feeling any apprehension? Are you feeling any fear? Are you just feeling a bit? No. Are you feeling really excited? It doesn't matter what you feel. But just being able to kind of go, okay, where am I? Because once you, and I do this with a lot of my clients, I do a lot of grounding exercises, especially at the start. Because when we start off and we ground, it's then so much easier for them to notice when things start to come up. And it's the same with horses, actually. When I work with horses, it's the same. I usually, before we can do any extensive training, quite often the first thing we need to do is just get them to relax first. Because once we're able to relax, it's easier to pick up when once you're in that state to be of that comfort zone, it's so much easier to recognize when you start to be in your stretch zone and when you start to go into your tonic zone. And once you're able to notice that you can, and this is what they do with the people who are scared of spiders and stuff like that. There's exposure. They do exposure therapy, and pretty much what they do is you just get exposed to it a little bit where you're just comfortable, and then you come back out of it. You get exposed to it where you're just comfortable, you come back out of it. Just comfortable and back out. Until that just comfortable becomes comfortable. And then you can go to the next stage. So let's say you are scared of spiders. I use this example a lot when I coach. When you're scared of spiders, if I've got a spider in my hand, are you okay? And some people might go, actually, no, I'm not. And I go and stand at the distance. If I've got a real spider in my hand, go and stand at the distance where you will be comfortable. Okay, move themselves to that distance. And if they're not scared, I just go, imagine you're really scared. We can still use the same thing. People can still imagine things because we love telling ourselves. We are good at creating stories. So I go stand at that distance and I go, okay, so you're comfortable here. And I go, like, yeah. And I go, okay, if I do one step forward, how does it feel now? And I go, actually, like I can feel like I'm okay, but I'm not okay. And then I go back a step and I go, oh yeah, I got that. And once you've got that part down and you move forward, you just move forward one step at a time. So that is what I want you to think of when you're thinking of overcoming your fear. Overcoming your fear is not about going from A to B. So it's not going from A to B, but it's trying to figure out if you can create a lot of small steps in between. And because if you've got a lot of small steps in between, it's so much easier to notice when you've kind of gone one step too far. Because often when you go one step too far, you're going to go and take 2 or 3 steps backwards. And if those steps are very small, those 2, 3 steps back is not that much. But if it's if you make the steps too big and then you revert back, it's a lot harder to come back into that. So this is the and how that kind, like if I would give an example of that, when you, let's say you are scared of hacking out, or you're worried about hacking out, you've had something's happened, you're worried about hacking out your horse, and you've done some work around your area where you live, or you maybe start off in the arena and you do like small hacks around, and then you go and go, actually this feels really good, and you go, I'm going to take my horse to the beach. And you might be absolutely okay, but it might also be a step too far. Maybe your horse kind of freaks out a little bit, and it's just flushing, it's bringing back all those memories, and your brain then goes, knew it, knew we shouldn't have done this, knew I shouldn't be hacking out, I was right, this was wrong. And it might just have been that you've just taken it a step too quick. It might have been that you needed to add in a few more steps. Maybe you needed to do a little bit more extensive hacking around where you were. Maybe you need to go to the beach and just literally take the horse off the float, give it a groom, and bring him back. Because it's not always about the actual thing, but if it's creating these small steps in between can be really, really helpful. But like I was saying before, often when you've made some progress, it's easy to go, oh my God, I've got it. And it's great to know that you've got it, but you also want to be mindful, and you want to, that's if you've created a bigger stretch zone, you can push through a little bit, but you also want to be then mindful, am I in my stretch zone, or have I just pushed that into the panic zone, and have I just ruined this a little bit? And when that happens, that is absolutely okay. What I want you to do when that happens is still be very mindful that it's okay to make mistakes, and be kind to yourself. Because quite often when this happens, that brain starts shouting again, I knew I was right, I shouldn't have done this. And instead of going, and when that brain is saying that, that's when I want you almost want to go, hold on a second. Don't say that. We tried. And one of the ways you can do that, one of the things that I want you to think of is it's not about success and failure. You didn't just succeed or fail. You succeeded or you learned something. Again, that brain, that blob in the box likes to think in black and white. But you've not made progress in life by never doing anything wrong, by not making mistakes. You've been scared quite a few times throughout your life for different reasons, and in a lot of cases you've overcome those things. So this kind of leads into the last part of this workshop is how can you turn your fear into focused and confident energy? So what are the actual steps? And these are like, when I was going through my writing, I lost my writing mojo because of that concussion. This is what I did. And this is what I do with most of my clients when they come and work with me. So these are the steps that I want you to take. I want you to start playing in your stretch zone. But I want you to be mindful of when that stretch zone starts to turn into panic zone, or when you've been in there for too long. So when you first start doing it, create that comfort zone and just gently go into your stretch zone and back. You continue to go stretch zone back, stretch zone back, stretch zone back. So you start to teach your brain that it can stretch itself and that it won't be in that state forever, but it's going to come out time and time again. In it, out, in it, out. And when you're out, take your time. Allow yourself to breathe, to relax, and to let that feeling dissipate out of your body. Allow yourself to process. Allow your brain to process that it's been in that stretch zone, it's come out, and that it's safe. When you first start doing it, don't go into the panic zone. Leave the panic zone alone. The moment you start to notice panic zone, out, back to comfort zone. Don't stay in it. That's for later. Or if you're not actually experiencing a lot of fear, you can start playing with your panic zone. But at this point, leave the panic zone alone. Comfort zone, a little bit of stretch zone, come back out of it. And then once you notice, you'll notice that your stretch zone actually won't be your stretch zone for very long. It will probably start to slowly become your comfort zone. Now, one thing I do want you to watch out for with this is that you don't, if you've been in your stretch zone and I don't want you to be necessarily, you don't have to be 100% comfortable. You can be 70% comfortable. The moment you're 60, 70% comfortable, that's when I want you to push it to the next one. Because sometimes it's easy. So, and this, if you first start doing it, just do comfort, you kind of want to go comfort stretch zone. But if you only do one thing and you never stretch yourself further, you're going to get stuck in that same spot. This is why this is a little bit tricky sometimes when you're doing this, because initially you have to keep it quite small, but it's then also easy to keep it really small. You do need to push yourself and stretch yourself. You just have to you just have to start to recognize that sometimes the stretch zone kind of becomes the comfort stretch zone. And then it's like comfortable to be in just that stretch when if you push yourself a little bit further, that stretch zone that was kind of stretchy but comfortable, then actually becomes properly comfortable. Other thing that I want you to do, and this is the other thing that I did, is start shifting your mindset to focus on what's positive and what's possible. Your brain has got a huge negativity bias. It loves, and this is why fear is so potent and it often holds us hostage. Because when we're experiencing fear, our brain goes, I need to stay safe, need to stay safe, need to stay safe, need to stay safe. And our brain, because it's designed to keep us safe, it looks at the things that are negative or unpleasant. It doesn't want to do those things. So what I want you to do when you're thinking about when you're working on overcoming that fear is change. I want you to think of reframing the things that you've done. So let's say you took your horse to the beach and it was in your mind you go, okay, well, I just stretched myself too far. This was scary. This was a huge failure. I'm never ever going to the beach again. That's probably what your brain will be saying. What I want you to do then, and often this is where writing things down is quite a good thing, good helpful exercise to do, is you want to try and shift it from, oh my God, this was the worst thing ever, to I tried. I went there, I gave it a go. Maybe it wasn't a huge success. Maybe I made the step too big, but I gave it a try, and I'm proud of myself for doing that. But I also want you to do that in all the every single thing that you've done. And even if you're really hesitant, if you don't want to get on your horse at the moment, that is absolutely okay. It could just literally be, I've come out and I picked up my horse and I took it into the arena. But start looking at all the positive things that you've done, all the things that you did achieve, and start celebrating those small wins. If that means, you don't have to, and you want to watch out, you don't start to compare yourself to who you were when you were younger. If I compare myself to when I was younger, I was gutsy as anything. I would jump on anything that bucked, reared, jump on it. I mean, I still work with a lot of horses that buck and rear, but the way that I deal with it is very different. Like, I don't just go on and do it. And this is what I see this with a lot of adult riders when they're experiencing fear. They go, but I was so confident when I was a teenager. It's like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. When you were younger, your brain wasn't maybe even fully developed. You weren't quite processing everything. You would probably, if you fell off, you bounced. Whereas now, like we get out of bed and it's like, oh, my back is a little bit sore. So a lot more aware of the dangers that are around us. So don't compare yourself to when you were younger, but celebrate all those small wins. Don't look back at what you did, but look at what you're achieving right now. And then the other key part, because this is, I just talked quite a lot about how you can overcome your fear. But a lot of riders that I work with, the moment I deal with their horses, I'm not saying this doesn't happen in all cases. A lot of times when I deal with their horses, and this is sometimes a bit of a chicken and the egg situation that could be caused by the rider's nerves as well. But quite often when I work with horses, I am not surprised that you are scared. I am often not surprised that you are scared when I go, can I play with your horse for a moment? I might just do some groundwork, or I'll get on. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not surprised that this is quite fear-inducing. Because quite often, when you're feeling scared, there's a reason for it. It often doesn't come out of nowhere. Maybe maybe your brain is overreacting a little bit, as in it's perceiving something that's maybe not quite there. But quite often there's also a horse behavior misunderstanding. What I see quite a lot is that people who are, and this actually goes back to that stretch zone and the panic zone and the comfort zone, it's people who don't have a good grasp of their own comfort zone, stretch zone, and panic zone. They're not picking up on the signals that their horses are getting. The moment someone says, this behavior came out of nowhere, behaviors don't come out of nowhere. Your horse's behavior does not come out of nowhere. If your horse spooked out of nowhere, unless it was a rabbit running by, or a car backfiring, or like a big noise, it did not come out of nowhere. But your horse has potentially been trigger stacking. It's possibly something you were doing too, but I didn't touch on that before. But basically what that means is something happens, stress level goes up, the horse isn't able to come back down to base level, just like with you, and it's still in that stretch zone, and then something else happens, and it's not quite able to come down all the way, and again, something else happens, and then a butterfly flies by, and all of a sudden your horse loses its shit. The thing is, a lot of riders don't seem to be able to pick up on this. So that's something that I want you to keep in mind too. I want you to be able to think, yeah, and recognize when your horse is moving out of sorts. And the key here is if you're able to get to that point of having some self-regulation and being able to go back to, I call it neutral, where you're in that comfort zone, you're going to be able to pick up when that tension comes in, and you will eventually then be able to learn to distinguish whether that tension is you, or if it's your horse, or if it's both. And it is okay if it's both. But that's still important to keep in mind too. So, to kind of pull this all together, I want you to play in your stretch zone. I want you to focus, create that mindset shift to focus on what's positive and what's possible. I really want you to celebrate the small wins. And the way I do this is I actually have got it here in a way. I just write a list. I just go days and then I write what I've done. And in this case, I just write down, this is just what I do with my horses, but you can also just change that into, these are all the amazing things that I've achieved today. Even if it's the smallest bit. Even if it's just I petted my horse. Doesn't matter. Write it down. So that your brain, you are starting to see all the things that you are achieving. And then I also want you to start understanding your horse's behavior. And we're actually going into this next week. So next week is all going to be about understanding your horse's behavior. So if you found this one interesting, you go, oh, actually, I need to know a little bit more about understanding my horse, come and pop in next week. All right. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it useful. I would love to hear your feedback. So please feel free to leave something in the comments or send me an email. Let me know how you experience this. And hopefully I'll see you next week.